In this clip, we're once again going to harmonise this simple melody using just the primary chords. That's to say chords 1, 4 and 5. We're also going to just use these chords in root position, but we're going to try and get a different cadence at the end here. So I'll go through, as we did in tutorial 1, just taking each note of the melody and trying to work out what's the best chord. So it starts in a similar fashion. Chord 1 for the G, establish a G major at the opening of the phrase. So we've got the key well established. The A is best harmonised with the chord 5, D major. The B harmonised again with chord 1, and the C harmonised with chord 4. The B once again harmonised with chord 1, the C with chord 4, and then the D at the end here could be harmonised with chord 1, which would give us 4-1, that would be a plagal cadence. But actually plagal cadences are fairly unusual in hymn writing. So we'll go for a 5 here, 4-5. You see the D fits chord 5, so that will give us an imperfect cadence. So we've got an imperfect cadence. That's a cadence which feels more open, as if the music is unfinished. And that makes a lot of sense because the melody, as you can see, is rising up. So there's a sense of incompleteness about the melody because it's rising up. It's not descending to feel more concluded. I'm now going to go through and add in our bass part, and as before, just going to use the roots of the chord, and we'll see what happens. So I've got the G, D, G, C. Again, I'll put that down the octave. G. Put that back up the octave, C and D. This all works fine except for this last bit here where we have the C going to the D and the C going to the D here. There's a problem here which you may have heard about before or you may not have. It's a problem called parallel octaves. So what are parallel octaves? Well, there's a chart up here which shows what these are. We've got here a soprano part, C to D, and then another part could be the alto part, or this could be the bass an octave lower, also going from C to D. The C and the C here are a perfect octave, going to a D and a D, which is a perfect octave as well, and that's basically forbidden. We're not allowed to have two parts moving in parallel from one octave to another octave. The same applies to parallel fifths. You've got here an example, we've got G and D, and that's going to a D and an A. So you've got a perfect fifth G to B and a perfect fifth D to A, and that would be considered to be parallel fifths because it's moving the soprano and the alto part, a fifth apart, moving to the soprano and the alto part, still a fifth apart. So parallel octaves and parallel fifths, these are not permitted. It doesn't matter which direction they're going. These ones are going up the way, these ones down the way. Here's some parallel fifths which are going up the way, and some parallel fifths coming down the way. If it were the same note repeated an octave apart, that's okay. You can have repetition of the same octave, but if it moves, that's where the problem lies. So parallel fifths, parallel octaves, those are not permitted. And the reason for that is, if we look over here, we've got our consonances. These are broken into two different categories, the perfect consonances and the imperfect consonances. It's the perfect consonances which we're not allowed to have in parallel. That's because those intervals are so pure and so perfect in each degree of the scale when they occur, that if they move, they destroy the sense of the independence of the parts. This applies to part writing, chorale writing, if you're dealing with counterpoint, if you're doing something orchestral or trying to mimic the style of, say, one of the pastoral composers, somebody like Vaughan Williams. Well, that's a different type of music, and the rules don't apply in the same way there. But for this type of writing, you're dealing with part writing, voicing of chorales, voicing of hymns. These rules do apply. So it's just the perfect fifths and octaves were not allowed in parallel. So if we go back to our example, we have a C here in the soprano and a C in the bass, and that's going to a D in the soprano and a D in the bass. So these are an octave apart, C to C, and an octave apart, D to D. So that's parallel octaves. So what we're going to do about this, how we're going to get around it? Well, one solution is to change the inversion of one of the chords, and I suggest we change the inversion of chord 4. If I do that, that becomes chord 4 in first inversion. I'll use a 6, the figure bass terminology, to show that that's the first inversion. I won't change the inversion of chord 5 because this is the end of the phrase and I want that to feel rooted, so root position makes a lot of sense for this chord 5 here. So by changing chord 4 to be chord 4 first inversion, I eliminate the parallels. What I'm now going to do is go through, as before, go through this and add in the other notes. And again, I'm going to do this as a keyboard part, 3 notes in the right hand, 1 note in the left, rather than a 4-part SATB hymn style texture. So we've got our G major chord. I'm just going to go down the notes of a G major chord, filling from the top down, so using this top down method. So filling down the chords, the notes of the chord of D major. Here again, G major, just filling down the notes from the top for G major, and C major, filling down. Okay, at this point we've got chord 4 in first inversion. There's a rule which we haven't discussed yet, that's to say that the third of the chord really ought not to be doubled. That's a general rule, try and avoid doubling the third. If we've been very strict about it, it's really the third in major chords. So since we're dealing with just the primary chords at the moment, we are dealing just with major chords, so we want to avoid doubling the third. What do I mean when I say the third of the chord? I mean when we look at a root position chord, for example up here, top left of the screen, the middle note is the third of the chord. So it's the middle note of the triad we're avoiding. So if we take chord 4 in first inversion, we have the middle note of the triad already present in the bass part. So what we want to do is not have that middle note again. So when we come down, we've gone C down to the G, the next note down is E, the middle note, but we've already got that in the bass, so I'm going to bypass that E down to that C there, and that means I've only now at this point got 1 E in the chord, 1 middle note, 1/3 of the chord. And I'm just going to finish off by coming down the way here. There we have it. Fairly straightforward harmonisation using chord 4B to avoid the parallel, and then missing out the third of the chord in the right hand part because we've already got it in the bass. Let's have a listen.